Okay. Okay, I guess, let's see, 11:03. We'll get started. I know I got another note about somebody being sick. Julie, so I think hopefully everybody can get onto my courses and access the Zoom meeting. I'll try to remember, or I will remember to upload it after the recording, after I get the indication or the email about it being available on the cloud. Okay, so what I want to do is introduce the next assignment to you. Now, this is kind of a this is essentially what I want in the assignment. It's a little rough. It's a play blast. Now, what I mean by I say essentially is you don't have to do exactly that. Okay, it can be you can accomplish or at least include all the things I'm requesting without doing exactly this way. One thing that's pretty not great about this is dead center in the middle of the page because it's just a play blast. But I am going to want you to use the skeletal model you created last semester. We're going to learn how to make an aorta that complies with the vertebral column. Basically, most of the landmarks will be referencing the vertebral column of your model. And we're going to pretend that you're making the start of a movie. This is like the introduction of a movie. And we're going to, in the process of completing the assignment, come on, you'll have to create some way of our seeing the aorta through the rib cage. And then focus on the aneurysm, and it will need a title. Okay. So I'm going to change just for a second where I'm sharing my screen here. So that you guys can see this better. So I'm going to switch over to 1 second. Let's try here. Is there music playing someplace? Okay. I just thought I was having a senior moment there or something. Okay, so right now you're seeing just this. Let's see, can you get to my course? Can you let me double check that this is the right screen that you're seeing. Okay, can you all see the screen there that has the introduction to the aortic aneurysm? Okay, get this out of the way a little bit. So, like I said, these are the things that I need you to include in this animation. And as you can see by the thing I demoed there for you, it doesn't have to be particularly long. I want you to animate the lights. Okay, so whatever lighting you're using, I want you to do something with them. That could be, you can animate their color, you could animate their intensity, you could animate their position if you wanted to. You're going to animate the camera. So in the animation you just saw in that play blast, the rib cage never moved. Nothing moved but the camera. So the camera, we did this just on your previous assignment. We did this with the bouncing ball where we made a camera with an aim, and then we changed the position of the camera and it stayed aiming at the bouncing ball. So we're gonna do the same thing here. We're gonna use the camera aim to focus on the vertebral, actually the whole thoracic skeleton and the aorta, and then we're going to record moving that around. Now, the other thing then we have to do besides the camera is we're required to have one side of the thoracic skeleton. It needs to fade or disappear. You can actually, we're going to actually learn to make a mask and put a hole so that we're seeing through one side of it. And we're going to animate the aortic transition to aneurysm using the blend shape function in the deformer menu. So that's how you saw at the end of that movie, the aorta start to balloon up there. I want you to include soundtrack. It's got to be royalty free, means you can't use the Beyonce, or I'm not going to try to pretend I know any of the music you guys listen to, but it can't be copyrighted, basically. Okay, and there's tons of royalty free things. And if you know garage bands, or you like to hum, or you play a musical instrument, you're welcome to use that. And we need to include a title. Now, this title can be quite variable, all right, as long as it basically somehow conveys the message that the movie that you're introducing is going to include ways of treating aortic aneurysms. Okay, so it doesn't have to be exactly these words. And you saw in mine, it just said aortic aneurysm. So you have some flexibility there, but I need a title to come in. Now, looking at the play blast, it may not be obvious to you if you haven't worked with After Effects, how that was built. But what we're really doing is we're making, in that particular play blast, we're making 3 different recordings, if you will. We're rendering the animation 3 different times. Now I'm going to go back to the play blast just so it makes more sense so you can see it. If I can find it. Let's try this. Let's see what happens if I bring the play blast up again. Can you see this, or do I need to reshare here? Let me just make sure. Okay, so let's rewind this and get it here from the beginning. Okay, so let's one more time. All right, so right now we've got a myocene that has all the thoracic skeletal elements and the aorta, and they're just sitting still, and the camera's going around it. Now, at this point, where you started to see that hole, go back a little bit. I'm not fast enough, man. Okay, at this point, you notice there's like a ghosting there. Okay, so what's happened now is there's a second recording, a second set of images that's just the Maya, it's the left side of the rib cage, and it's playing the same way. It's playing, the camera's recorded it exactly as it recorded the first layer, but now it's actually the entire left side of the rib cage playing through there. Okay, and what the camera's done, what we've done is we've actually gone into Maya, and I'm sorry, into After Effects, and we made a mask. And the mask is this kind of, you can barely see this faint circle as the left side is disappearing. So the mask is a shape, kind of an oval shape, and its edges are feathered, and we're actually changing the size of the mask to make it grow, okay, to make it enlarge. So that little sequence where you see the mask or where you see through the rib cage is a layer above the original. Now this is the layer below the mask, okay? And actually, this actually has another layer by itself. The aorta now is on its own layer by itself, and the right side of thoracic skeleton is on a layer behind it. So I can, in After Effects, decrease the opacity of the bones and leave the aorta, because it's an independent layer, in its full opacity. So I know this sounds kind of confusing, and it's going to be simpler when we go through this, but I just kind of want to give you an overall view of what we're trying to do. I'm going to go back and share my, I think I can do that here. Let's see. Now, you guys all seen, I know you guys in the room are, but are the folks on, let me double check just to make sure. So when we do that, we're actually breaking this assignment down into 3 phases, okay? The first phase, which is we're going to work on this week, is building the aorta and organizing your thoracic skeleton to make sure we want to organize in such a way that we can control it, so that we can, for example, hide the entire left side of the rib cage and see the rest of the right side and the vertebral column, etc. So the first week we're going to model it. The second week we're going to start making the different phases we need, and we're going to make a storyboard that explains to our client what our animation will look like when it's completed. So what we're gonna do is we're gonna create essentially static images that represent the keyframes in our movie. And then the third week, we're gonna use the blend shape and other tools to render the model, the camera spinning around the model, and then adding layers into After Effects so we can put out one movie that looks like all that happens at one time, okay? So let's go through this a little bit. While I was working on this, the World Cup was going on, and it very tragically, this poor guy died while reporting on the World Cup. And it turned out that he had a ruptured aortic aneurysm. So sometimes this condition is not detected until a very unfortunately critical point where it bursts. And you can imagine once the aorta bursts, it's almost impossible to stop the bleeding fast enough to keep the person alive. So this is just to kind of give you an idea that this is, unfortunately, this happens. So like I said, the first phase, which we do, I think this is Sunday. We're going to learn how to model the aorta. And in this, here's the list of the structures that you're going to add to the aorta, the branches, if you will. Now, I know up here I talked about it a little bit, and you saw in the demo there. You don't have to make the entire branch. You're just making a little like segment of it to indicate where it's coming from. Okay. And one of the things you will be graded on is how you position that branch origin relative to the thoracic and lumbar vertebra, okay? Because the vertebral column is often used as a reference for explaining or documenting where, actually locating where a structure is. So one of the reasons we tortured you with making the rib cage and the vertebral column and all the scapula and the clavicles is you now have a three-dimensional framework to create any soft tissue you want. And what you'll find is if we all stripped ourselves of everything but our skeletons, we would all be very, very close in proportionate relationships. In other words, I might be taller or shorter than some of y'all, but the scale of my femur compared to my rib cage would be almost exactly the same as yours. And the bones of your body are very, very consistent. The soft tissue is a whole nother, you probably saw in the cadaver lab where, sometimes arteries and veins, oh my God, they're all over the place. And muscles, for some reason, something that's incredibly thin on one cadaver may be incredibly thick on another because it's compensating for some muscle that was compromised. So that bony skeleton was built so that throughout the rest of your career, you can use it as a framework. You can drop it into Photoshop and add anything you need and know that you're getting relatively close to the anatomical relationship that you should be showing, the scale and its relationship in terms of location compared to other structures. So I have on my computer pretty much a whole organ system based on that skeleton. So when I have a client that asks me for something, I just pull it out and model it and reference it and either render it like that or bring the render into Photoshop and customize it. Okay. So that's why I want you to understand why we went through the process of building that rib cage and the rest of the thoracic skeleton. So your assignment that's due on the 12th is I want two renderings. One of both of them from an anterior lateral view, and one of them should have full access or the rib cage on one side should be removed so I can see the aorta. Okay. The other rendering can have the rib cage, the full rib cage intact, just like you saw in the movie. So we'll go over the rest of this more detail each week, but the next step, like I said, is we're going to make a storyboard, and we're going to talk about how to animate the camera. And then the final step is we'll animate the blend shape, which is how we modify the structure of the aorta as it goes through the transition from quote unquote normal to an aneurysm. Okay, so let's look at modeling the aorta. Okay, first thing I want you to look at is the anatomy. So I put together just a whole collection of information to give you a starting point to do your research. Now, this is out of Gray's anatomy. So what Gray's is basically saying, the diameter of the aorta where it exits the base of the left ventricle is about 3 centimeters. At the point where it bifurcates into the common iliac arteries, it's about 1.75 centimeters. Okay, so now what that tells you is a common rule you have to apply when you're animating or illustrating arteries is when an artery gives off a branch, the diameter of the vessel that was the source has to get smaller. Okay, and if an artery gives off a branch, if it gives off two branches, if it splits, if it bifurcates, then the two branches that are now bifurcating, some of their diameter can't be bigger than the origin of the artery that bifurcated. You understand what I'm saying? I can't make something bigger, the two branches their diameter can't be larger than the original one. Just doesn't have enough tissue to do that. Okay, so what we're saying here is in the course of giving off all the branches the aorta does, its scale, its diameter has been reduced to, what? A little more than half. I mean, 1.5 would be half, and it's 1.75. So that's a way of kind of giving you an idea as you create your model. What should the scale be at these 2 points, where it starts and where it bifurcates or ends? These are some links to articles that will give you more information about the aorta, more pictures. Here's an example of a dissected aorta. You can get the idea of the relative scale of the branches. These are almost all of these are in the required list. The other thing to take a look at is, some of this is going to be a little distorted, maybe because of the preservation. So you kind of put that a little bit of keep that in mind when you dissect the cadaver. That kind of rubbery, stiff artery feel is probably more a preservation phenomenon than it is the actual real artery. If you could somehow touch a real artery in a person, or when you see it in the OR, they're much more malleable, much more gentle, or just a smoother, softer kind of feel. But I want you to get from this idea that there is a movement in these arteries. They're not pipes. They're not copper or plastic PVC. So your vessels should have some subtle movement. They don't have to get necessarily quite as tortuous as this, but they do. If you look at some of the angiograms, like of the splenic artery, it's incredible the path that thing takes between the celiac trunk and the spleen. Here's some insight or some imaging for the aortic valve. And here's some imaging for where the aneurysms, how they begin to distort the shape. Now, again, where the aneurysm is located, that's up to you. I mean, it can be a thoracic, part of the thoracic aorta, it can be abdominal, it can be down right above the pelvis like this one. So there is no, it has to be at one spot. Unfortunately, or depending on how you look at it, aneurysms can occur quite a few different places. This is from the Journal of Korean Neurosurgical Society, and you can see they're doing some detailed explanation of the different paths or different variations that you will often see coming off the aortic arch. Okay. Now, what I want to point out here is you don't have to do, you should do the quote unquote more typical normal branching. Okay. What you want to look at is, in general, think about what I just said. Okay. So if the on the left side, if the common carotid and the subclavian are about this big in diameter, then the brachiocephalic needs to be about the same size as those two put together, because it's going to give off the right common carotid and right subclavian. Follow my point? So that's one of the reasons I'm trying to emphasize this with you. This also shows, like we just talked about, all these different, your body will do almost anything to survive, right? And it will come up with all sorts of ways of compensating for a flaw or a deviation on one side. We're going to go to this page. This page lists the vertebral level and structures that you'll find at those levels. And that can be real help to you here, because it will specifically talk about the vessels. This is just to show you from one of the classic atlases. I think this is out of Clemente's. how the aorta, its relationship to the vertebral column. So it's pretty close to being right on top of the vertebral column, which if you think about it, kind of makes some sense, right? It gives a little protection. You're not going to get to it from the back. Here's some more examples of a generally quote unquote healthy aorta. And this is imaging. So this is actually not as distorted as the one we saw that was dissected and preserved. And here's some examples of aneurysms. I think this is the kidney you can see up here with the renal arteries. And here's a nice, again, this is been touched up from one of the radiographic societies. So they've explained, what the color, they put artificial color on here to help you understand what you're looking at. Now these guys, this photograph here, we have a section in the course or in this unit that talks about the Visible Human Project. So this is taken from the Visible Human Project. So I can't remember when it was a couple decades ago. But the United States government, the National Library of Medicine, came up with the idea that we would take an executed prisoner, freeze them, and then use a saw. After we did a complete CAT scan and X-ray and MRI collection, we would take a saw and saw through the frozen individual and take photographs. And I think in the male, this was, like I said, a prisoner who was condemned to death, and he gave permission for them to use his body after his death. I think in the male, there were 1,500 photographs. The female was not a prisoner. She, again, volunteered, and they are 1,800 of the female because they figured out how to make the kerf of the saw, how to make the saw blade just a little thinner. So they got another 300 sections. So the reason I have this in here is you can use this chart and say, okay, the carina. How many people know what the carina is? Anybody remember the term carina? C-A-R-I-N-A? Okay, we'll talk about that a little bit then. But here you can see the three branches of coming off the aortic arch. That right there, it's very hard to see on the screen, but that's a pale green. That's the cartilage in the trachea where it bifurcates to the two bronchi. And you can find the carina here, right here. If you look, and we'll see a little better picture of this, a larger picture. You can see the carina, there's the two bronchi, and that shows you, there's the aorta, and this is the aorta coming out of the heart. The arch is obviously above the section, and there's the descending thoracic aorta there. Okay, so that's why the carina is kind of a critical landmark, and it's basically been identified at T4. So that means we're looking at the fourth thoracic vertebra right here. So those are the kind of landmarks that you can use to your advantage when you build your model, so that you can have the aorta travel along, descend into the body and have structures come up at relatively correct places. Okay. Here you can see, you can barely make it out, but you can see here's the sternum, and here's the head of the clavicle articulating with it. So you got an idea the level that is, and you can start to see just the top of the arch. You see how the vessels are starting to merge into one larger shape. Okay, so that anatomy page is there to try to help you understand. I think if you go here, you'll find a lot of the images you saw here and here. That link will take you, I think, to where I got this from. but I've always found this site to be helpful with gross anatomy. This is that chart I was showing you. So you can see here, and I've highlighted some of the things related to what we do. So the apex of the lung, rear angle of the scapula, jugular notch, base of the spine of the scapula. The aorta through the diaphragm at T12. Okay. So again, celiac trunk, L1. Bifurcation, L4 or 5. So again, that's where your thoracic vertebra and your lumbar vertebra, the skeleton you made last semester, becomes that framework, that reference for you. Okay. Now, this is the modeling videos. I'm going to skip that for now because I'm going to try to show you a little demo on how to do some of the modeling. And this is a larger collection of references. So you can download this file and actually position it as an image plane or as a plane on your thoracic skeleton and have an idea where you are. You can see right here where you can see pretty clearly where again, the articulation of the clavicle and the sternum. So based on what we just saw up there, that's around what, T2 or so? I can't remember what it was on that. Here's your 3 branches. There's your arch. And you can use this. Now here again, it's just kind of, you're just at the bottom of the clavicle. So now the clavicle's not articulated, so you're below that on the sternum. And you can keep going down. Now this is what I was talking about. This is how I use them to try to make the arch. So you can use an image plane with the top view and position it at the vertebral level. And then that opening that you see for the aorta in that image plane, what I'm saying is you know how big the vertebral body is, okay, at this point. So this 1480 refers to the slide number, the Visible Human Project number. And there's a lot more than, there's 1500s, but I'm not sure why they got down to 1480 so quickly, because there's obviously a lot more slides below. So if I know what that vertebral level is, I can either make this an image plane, or I can make a plane and make the image the color for the plane and move the plane around. And then I can position it where I want it to be so that I can decide how big the aorta should be at that spot and how far away it should be from the vertebra, and whether it's on the left side or the right side of the vertebral column, because it's not dead center. So you can see it's at this point, it's off to the left a little bit. Here's your esophagus in front of it. Okay, so yes.
So you import that image,
Right.
and then you position it, and then how much scaling and which parameters are you scaling to? Is it just the vertebral body that you're going to scale to, or
I'm going to scale the whole image.
Of like
right. In other words, yes, I'm going to scale the whole image so that it basically approximates my rib cage, and more specifically, it looks like the body of that vertebra, the vertebral body of that photograph is about the same size as the vertebral body of my model.
Okay. Cool.
Yeah, I'm just using the regular scale tool, X and Y. I'm sorry, probably X and Z, because there's no Y, it's flat. Okay. Any other questions? Anybody from the chat room? Never find my chat room. Where's my chat room? Anybody over in 1212 got a question? Mary, you got everyone under control over there? Okay, don't need to call the police or anything? Good. Like to avoid trouble. All right, I'm gonna switch and go to Maya and work with the idea here. Okay, so I've hidden the aorta that I built in there. Let's see. Okay, so there's the aorta inside. Let's put the color on it. I'm using the default right now. All right, now you notice I've got things organized now. Depending on what you did, how you ended up at the end of the fall, you may or may not have to do some organization with your modeling. Okay, you don't have to remodel any of this, but what we talked about and what I know I'm going to want to do is I'm going to want to hide at one point. Unfortunately, I got an animation on here, so it will keep changing on me. I got to hide at one point the left side. Okay, so in the movie you saw, I'm not sure this is the exact same file I did for the Play Blast, but this is what I was talking about. So at one point, this is going to be rendered without that left side on it. And then I can see, and then I'm going to render the left side, and then I can poke a hole through it. So this vertebra is purple because it's L4. And I'm sorry, T4. So I know I've got a landmark there. And you may find that it's helpful to colorize L1 or T12, whatever you have to do to help you understand when you're positioning the branches. And these are the branches that I've created off of here. So there's the celiac trunk. I believe that's the superior mesenteric and the renal. There's the inferior mesenteric. And then here's the bifurcation. Okay, so basically, these are all the branches you have to do. And here's your three branches up top. All right, so I'm going to hide that for a sec. So you notice I have I have layers where I can hide the right, and I call it the right thoracic because it's not only the rib cage, it's also the clavicle and the scapula on the right side. And I can hide the left. So I can use that when I'm doing my animation. So that's one thing you should also do this week is organize your skeletal elements so that you're able to hide one side or the other when you record. Okay. And then you're going to want to make sure when you get your aorta done that it's its own model so that you can actually at one point in time record just it. I think I have a sternum here someplace. Yeah. So see, in this case, I'm just animating the camera. And then I think I start to do the, I don't think I did the shape blend yet. Okay. But my point is organize your things up. Select all the ribs on one side and all the and the scapula and clavicle on that side and make it a layer. If you want an alternative way to do that is work with a group. Okay. Now, not to confuse you, but in the future, the very near future, the next assignment, we're going to use a IK spline handle, okay, to modify the position of your vertebral column. So if you you put that together again for the fall, all I'm saying is that's what I'm assuming you have access to. You have a vertebral layer. The vertebrae are controlled by a joint. The joint is controlled by this IK spline curve. The discs between the joints are controlled by a lattice. The lattice is controlled by a cluster. The top set of lattice points are controlled by a cluster that's under the control of the vertebra above it. The bottom set of the lattice points are controlled by a cluster that's under the control of the vertebra below it. Okay, that's the system that I believe we ended up with at the end of the fall. So for this assignment, we don't need any of that to function. But as you're organizing, right now, all you need is just to be able to hide things. But if you have free time, Friday night, waiting to go out, only 7 o'clock, and you're a young guy, you want to wait till 10 to go out, so you're cool. Might for 3 hours, just make sure you got this thing all organized. Be fun. Fun to look forward to, right? Does everybody, just curiosity, does everybody have any, is everybody pretty close to that kind of structure for their bone? Okay, that's great, because that's what we'll do next. I just want to make sure everyone knows where we're going. All right, so let's go back to the aorta. I'm going to hide the one, or I can leave that open. This is the curve, a copy of the curve I used to make this aorta. This is a copy of the circle. So what I did was I freehand drew a curve using the CV curve tool. And I used the contour of the vertebral column and the level of the anatomic of the vertebra to help me understand how that curve was. So when I got to about down here, remember we said its diameter up here is 3 and down here is 1.75. So you can see how I'm tapering that. Now, in addition, I could use some of those sections to modify diameter independently as I came down once I had the model built. And I'm going to show you how to build that model in just a second. I could come in here and modify these edge loops according to that VHP thing. Okay, according to the diameter of that. How big is the hole in the VHP? If the body of the VHP photograph and the vertebral body here of my model are at the same, relatively speaking, the same size, how big was the aorta at that point? Okay, so let's talk about how to actually make the aorta. So everyone understands this curve was actually, it doesn't matter where it is, but this curve was a copy of the one that made this. Then the circle is 3 centimeters in diameter. And I need to get that circle. I want to make sure that circle's right. The center of that circle is on this curve, right on the curve is running right through the center. So first I'm going to do, I got my circle selected. And I want to make sure I delete any history that's on it. I want to make sure that it's transformation is frozen, or I freeze the transformations, and I want to center its pivot. And I'm going to do the same thing to the curve. Because any of that information that's not in this state can alter things. All right, so now I'm going to hold down the letter C, and with the middle mouse, drag on the curve. And by dragging, now notice it didn't quite work at first. So I should be able to hold down the letter C and just drag on the curve, and the thing should pop right onto the curve. It doesn't quite want to do that. But if you keep playing with it, you can finally get it. So I've still got the letter C depressed. And now that circle is constrained to the curve. So I'm going to put it at the very beginning. Okay. And I'm going to freeze this transformations one more time, because you see when I moved it, I added some information to it. So I got the circle selected, going to select the curve. I'm going to go under surfaces and say extrude and get the option box for extrude. So extrude allows me to say, take this circle and run it along this path and make a polygon. So in order to do that, by default, it's not going to look like this. The box is going to come up as a NURB. And everybody usually asks me this, and I forget to look it up. It's something like non-rational, I can't remember the acronym, but a NURB is another way of modeling. It's my feeling is, or my way of analogy I give you is, a NURB is like Illustrator and a polygon is like Photoshop. NURBs, I can't get into the information quite as easily, but it's a lot smaller in memory and a lot more mathematically accurate. Polygons, I can get to things and modulate things and move things around more, but it's not, when you're in the auto industry, for example, and they're using Maya to design fenders or some kind of part, they use NURBs, not polygons. All right, so I'm going to change that to a polygon, and then I have to make sure it says quads, and I want to add a count. That means how many polygon faces, how many quad polygon faces am I going to allow the software to make in order to create this shape? 256 is kind of arbitrary. I'll say that because it gives me roughly enough edges that I can maneuver things. The other thing I should have said too, I'm sorry, when I created that circle, it's a NURB circle. When I created it, I made sure it had 8 sections. Because I'm working with quads, I always want everything to be divisible by 4. So 256, I think, is divisible by 4. I have to look it up, but I think it is. And 8, I know, is divisible by 4. I've known that since the first grade, I think. But 8 also gives me enough faces that I can pull, I can extrude the branches of these vessels I want off that shape without getting so many faces that it becomes really difficult to do. So you're welcome to experiment with other numbers. You know, if you want to go to 12, want to, go to 16, but I think what you're going to find is this is going to give you, relatively speaking, a good collection of faces to work with. So if I wanted to go to, now again, please imagine this is right up against the vertebral column. It's not floating out in space when I'm doing the modeling. So it's actually like it is here. Let's hide the sternum for a second. Yeah, okay, there you go. So I'm doing the modeling right on the vertebral column, so it helps me know. So this is why T4 is important, because that's the level that the aorta comes out of the heart. And I got tired of trying to count every time the vertebra. That's why I started using colors. All right, so now I'm going to pull out, I'm going to extrude my vessels, and I think you guys can figure out how I'm going to do that. I'll grab, let's say, this face and say edit extrude, or I can say edit mesh extrude, or I can say, I think, Command E. And I'm going to move this little box out of the way. And I can just grab the arrow, come up, pull over here a little bit. Well, I think I did this twice somehow. Hold on. I think in the course of playing around with you guys or talking to you guys, I actually did this double times. Oh, I know why. I'm sorry. I had one already made and I had hidden it, so it's underneath here. Let me just get rid of it. All right, let's try this again. Circle first, then the curve. Surfaces, extrude, we've already done all the settings, okay. Command E. Yeah, oh, so there we go. Two-side lighting is off. All right, so I pulled this over. Now you can add some divisions in there. So when you're done with this model, you can say, oh, I'd like to modify that shape a little bit. I'll grab this edge and move it around a little bit, or I'll grab the face on top. So I can get a little movement with it. Okay, and obviously you can go to the preview mode. Now, if you find that when you do preview, you notice how that top shape gets a little too small or it gets odd because there's such a big gap between the different edges. What you can do is insert an edge loop and give yourself a little bit more information there, okay? So a lot of times what I'll do is I'll say insert edge loop, and I'll pull an edge really close, and that way when I go smooth, it holds a better round shape. It keeps kind of a cut edge look. As a matter of fact, later if I want to delete that face and make it hollow, I can. Okay, I wouldn't worry about that right now. So that's how you can start making your vessels. Now, you can extrude all these all you want, but let's say you want to do, let's just do the renal artery here. I'm not going to worry about exactly what vertebral level I'm at, but let's say I'm right about here. And I want to pull this out. Now, let's say I want to make the renal artery have a little curve to it, and I want to extend it a little further than I did these other ones, okay? One thing I can do is create a curve again. Let's come over to the front window. I can see what I'm doing a little better. Let's say I'll grab that face. Now I'm going to make a curve. I'm going to create a curve. A CV curve. And I'll just come off on the front window. The first 2 points of a curve. So I notice, make sure you understand this. When you make a curve, initially it doesn't seem like it's working, but you got 1 point, which is a square. The second point is a U, the letter U. Third point, and then by the time you get a fourth point, that's when you actually start to see the curve. Because what you're originally making are actually, they're kind of like anchor points in Illustrator, but they're actually not. They're called CVs. They're called control vertex. Okay. So I'm gonna go make one again from scratch. And don't worry, starting point square, second point U, third point, fourth point. Need a little more space here. All right, so there's my curve. So the reason I made a curve is I can bring this over. Let's center its pivot. And bring this over to where the faces I want to extrude. And I can tell, let's go back to the perspective window now. I can tell the software. Let's take this face. And I'm going to go to the extrude menu. But instead of saying just extrude, I'm going to say, give me the options. And I'm going to ask it to extrude on the curve. So I have to have that selected. So I've got the face selected. I've got the curve selected. And then I say extrude. And see, now it actually extruded on that curve. Now, it didn't look like it did anything great. But if I give it some divisions, it will now modify that vessel to match that curve. Okay, it's got to have enough divisions, in other words, to make a change. Okay. The other thing you can do, if I go back to my multi-view and I come back over here on my front view and I say show, and I hide my polygons. And now I have this curve. And I grab one of those control vertices and move it, I'll change the polygon model. Okay, so if I didn't get what I wanted, or for example, in this case, we're kind of only in the X and Y axis. If I wanted to add a Z element, I can make those control vertices move around a little bit. Now, if you find that the way this comes off, and this is specifically what I was talking about with the nerves, okay? To make this happen with nerves is a nightmare. To try to pull a branch off a nerve and have a smooth thing, it can really be challenging. But here, with the polygons, we can do it the way we want. Now, if you find that this is a little too, this is actually pretty good, but if you want to make this branching a little tighter, you can do the same thing. Insert an edge loop. And then bring it down closer to the base. And then you see the branching stays tighter, because when you have a big space between edges and you say preview, the software is basically saying, okay, I'm going to generate halfway between the two edges, the illusion as if there was more faces. And when you tighten up the space between two edges, it then gives you the software has a much smaller space to put that curve, so it gets tighter. It gets, does that make sense to you guys? So that, in a nutshell, is what I'd like you to do. Like I said, what I just showed you is contained in this collection of videos. Okay, and if you it also has in that, if you click on this, it will bring up that image if you need an image to add to your modeling. Okay, and down below, it gets a little crazy. I think I accidentally duplicated the videos. So watch what the title is. And then you can see, this is just, again, another set of videos that will show you how to do, like this shows you how to extrude the brachiocephalic. This shows you how to make the superior mesenteric. Now in the videos, what I do is, when I get to the end of the vessel, I try to bury the lumen or the hole in the vessel. So I select that face and I say, extrude again, and I scale it a little bit. And then I say, letter G to repeat the extrusion. And then I grab that Y and bring it inside. So when you see it, it kind of hides it like there isn't. The other thing you can do is, if you want to, wait to the very end, leave everything, and then punch a hole in this, and then go through and select the model and say, local translation Z, and it will put a thickness in there. Okay. You guys do that yet? I think if I get rid of that space, let me see if I can get rid of a couple faces real quick and show you. Okay, that one's already hollow. This one's kind of messy, but it's here. And that one's kind of messy the way I made it. That artery got collapsed. It's not going to look good. I don't want to fix it for you right now, but what I was saying, if I grab the object and then again say edit mesh, extrude, I get that. And if I say go into a negative direction with the Z there, see, now I've made a thickness. So now I actually have a lumen for the whole vessel. Okay. I can't promise you that when you get all the vessels on there, that it will understand how to do this cleanly, but it should. We'll do this later in the semester for making a model of the stomach and the esophagus. We'll make a shell, if you will, a polygon shell, and then say extrude and local translation Z. So it should do it, but just like anything with Maya, the automatic tools, the more complex the shape gets, the more challenged the software is to accomplish what it's supposed to do. Any questions? But basically what you want to get done by the 12th, get your model of the aorta done. Make sure your skeleton is, your thoracic skeleton is organized so that you have a left side, a right side, the sternum, and the vertebral column, all on unique layers or in unique groups, so you can easily hide them and show them selectively. Okay? All right. I think I can stop recording now.